Okay, picture this $1,000,000 idea for a movie. We've got a kid, adorable kid, sweetest kid in the world. What's his name? Doesn't matter. In fact, don't even give him a name. So he lives with his beloved grandma. She tells him stories about witches. Turns out they're real, turns out she's right. He comes into contact with a group of witches. They turn him into a mouse, he retaliates and turns all of them into mice. And then he accepts his early death and stays a mouse for the rest of his short, mousy life. Welcome to Teacup for One. My name is Matt and I have 2 degrees, and today we're continuing Witch Week. Which week? This week, by talking about a film that I think I suppressed for most of my life, the 1990 adaptation of Roald Dahl's The Witches, starring Anjelica Huston. The movie is based on the Roald Dahl novel of the same name about an unnamed boy in the novel. In the movie, his name is Luke, who goes to live with his grandma, who is actually a retired witch hunter. She teaches him that witches are real and how to identify them. Some basic identifying factors: they don't have toes, they don't have hair, but they do have purple glowing eyes. So Luke becomes like a master at identifying witches, which is pretty lucky, because he goes on vacation with his grandma to the same hotel where the witches are having their convention. And I just think it's so special that the witches are having a convention. That's adorable. Anyway, the witches turn him into a mouse and chaos ensues. I know Roald Dahl would probably disagree, but I personally feel like most films based on Roald Dahl novels have a pretty great track record, and this one is no exception. The practical effects in this movie are spellbinding. And the work done by the Jim Henson Creature Shop is just incredible, as always. From the larger creatures like the witches in their unmasked form, to the smaller creatures like the puppets that they use for the kids when they're in mouse form. And right at the center of this movie, we have Anjelica Huston just commanding the film in one of her most memorable performances as the Grand High Witch. Now, the really funny thing about this movie is that the day after I added it to my watch list for this whole movie marathon was the day they released the trailer for the remake starring Anne Hathaway, Octavia Spencer, and Stanley Tucci. And I'm honestly not sure how to feel about it. My first reaction when I saw the poster was pretty optimistic because Robert Zemeckis is one of my favorite directors, Stanley Tucci can do no wrong, and then you just throw Anne Hathaway and Octavia Spencer into the mix, you've got a recipe for success. But then I saw the trailer, and then I rewatched the 1990 adaptation of The Witches, and I don't know, now I'm just confused, and all I can think is, do we need another film of The Witches? Furthermore, did we ever need a movie of The Witches? Don't mistake me, the original film is pretty much perfect. And yes, I know, Roald Dahl hated it, we'll get to that. But for me, I feel like the 1990 film perfectly embodies like all of the dark sensibilities that run through all of Roald Dahl's books. But rewatching the film just reminded me how dark this particular book actually is. In the original The Witches, the main character is transformed into a mouse with no way of turning back into a human, and he's pretty quick to just make peace with his situation and accept the fact that he's going to die in about 9 to 10 years with his grandmother, and he just makes the decision to spend the rest of his time hunting witches to try to save other children. Now, according to Roald Dahl, that was a happy ending. I guess I can kind of see it. I think I'd call it more of a hopeful ending, if that. But that has actually always been a huge point of controversy with the 1990 film. The fact that they changed the ending. They did in fact shoot both endings. The original ending, where Luke stays a mouse, and then the ending that we now have, where one rogue witch turns good and transforms him back into a human. And Roald Dahl hated the ending that they went with. Apparently he said that in choosing that ending they completely missed the point of his book. Now, I admit, I personally like the happy ending, but I can't get over wrapping my mind around what he could have meant when he said that having him transformed into a human missed the point of the story. Like, what could the story possibly benefit from having our lead character doomed to spend the rest of his very short life now, because he's a mouse, as a mouse? I don't know, compared to other Dahl stories, this one has just always felt a little one note to me, especially when you're reading it and you don't have the aid of the really beautiful visuals that the film gives you. But this is, at its core, just a story about a kid who's turned into a mouse, then he turns the witches into mice, and then that's it. Like, there's no motivation for why he's coming into conflict with the witches, just aside from the fact that he is a child. As opposed to something like Matilda or James and his giant peach, where the kids have some kind of personal tie and connection to the people who are bullying them. But, oh wait. But then again, maybe that's the point. That he doesn't have any connection to them whatsoever. He's just part of a larger demographic, kids, which is being unfairly targeted and tormented by these witches who appear to be totally innocent and hide in plain sight. And even though it's too late for him to recover, he still makes the decision to devote the rest of his very short mousy life to protecting other kids from suffering the same fate. Okay, so if that is the point of the novel, then I fully understand why Dahl didn't want him to change back into a boy at the end, because it fully, diminishes his suffering and his mission to stop witches from targeting other kids. Okay, so then this brings me back to my main point, my main question. Do we need another movie based on the witches? I'm inclined to say yes, for two reasons. The first being because ever since this film was announced, they've been reporting that it's going to stay truer to the book and that it will probably retain the original ending. Because the first movie is so well made and it's so much fun to watch, it's easy to overlook the fact that really not much happens. The remake has an opportunity to really embrace the ending, where our main character accepts his fate as a mouse and then teams up with his grandma on a mission to go out and eradicate the world of all the rest of the witches. So yes, I am predicting it. I am calling it right here, right now, that voice of Chris Rock narrating the trailer is the voice of Chris Rock as a mouse. And that brings me actually to the second reason I'm in favor of this remake, is the choice to transition the story from Europe to America and to cast an African-American actor in the lead role. Movies and theater are very slowly starting to take steps towards more diversity in casting, which I think is great, and I personally love seeing it in these kinds of reboots, because this is a story by one of the most beloved children's authors of all time, and it's telling it using an actor who represents a group of kids that haven't seen themselves on screen yet in a Roald Dahl story. Yes, the original film is a classic, but getting a remake is not going to diminish its brilliance. Worst case scenario, we'll get a mediocre CGI fest, and we can take comfort in the fact that we always have Anjelica Huston there to haunt our dreams. Oh wait, can we also just acknowledge how much more terrifying it is to just have a group of adults pinning down a kid and force feeding him poison, as opposed to having him magically fly up in the air and turn into a mouse? I just really don't like CGI. But best case scenario, we get a good film that stands on its own and retains Dahl's original ending while fully reimagining the story for a new audience. But for now, friends, that concludes yet another episode of Teacup for One. Let me know in the comment section down below. Are you looking forward to the remake of The Witches? And if you want to follow me for the rest of my Halloween movie marathon, don't forget, subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed already. No, seriously though, it's super easy. All you have to do is click on my face. Thanks for joining me today, everyone. My name is Matt and I have 2 degrees, and that's the Tea Cup for One. Child is a mouse.